So hello everyone. Thank you so much for being here today for another chat and learn on this beautiful Wednesday, wherever you are in the world, whether it's morning, afternoon, or night. Super happy to have you here with our conversation, whether you're live streaming or on the call with us today. And so I'm really excited to talk about voting today, why it's so important, and especially in this election with our very special guest. And so let's dive right into it. Before we get into the actual conversation, I just want to cover a couple of housekeeping rules. Turn your cameras on and come off of mute. We really want this conversation to be about you and answer your questions, especially all the questions surrounding everything that it has to do with voting. And so we really just want to encourage participation. And if you do come off of mute, you will show up on the live recording and you'll show up on the platform. So I just want to let you know, for privacy reasons, of course. If you have any private questions or comments, please feel free to write in the chat box, and you can message me privately to ask your question anonymously by finding my name, Nicole Felter, in the chat box. And this is being recorded, so please feel free to, be as attent as possible in this time. We really just want you to be here in the now. And then finally, keep up with us on social. You can find us at PowerToFly on every channel. So Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, it's one of those days. And today's Thursday, isn't it? Not Wednesday. I'm realizing now. Okay, so that shows you just where I am today. And so lastly, subscribe to our YouTube channel where we have these events, and you can live stream them, and you can always come back and watch them. Perfect. So with that, I'm really excited to welcome Samantha Tigner, or Sam. Beyond the introduction she's going to give us, I think something really important to note here is that she is the secretary and she manages social media for Democrats abroad in Argentina. And so I'm really excited to have her here talking about voting and why it's important, and also importantly, how to do it from abroad. And so with that, Sam, I really just want to hand the mic to you so you can tell us a little bit about yourself and why this topic is so important to you.
Yeah, so like Nicole said, so thank you all for joining us. My name is Sam. So I'm originally from the United States, but I've been living in Argentina now for coming on 3 years, like 2.5, 3 years now. So I've been living here during that time. I studied politics and government and Spanish in college. So I've always been super interested in politics. I took AP, government, comparative, and US politics in high school. I've been really interested in it since I was a kid. It's kind of funny. I was telling Nicole about this earlier, is that so I grew up, my parents have always taught me that it's really important to vote. It's essential because we live in a democracy, and so democracy does not work unless people participate in it. That it depends on the participation of the people. And in the United States, a lot of people pride themselves on having such a great democracy, and if you're not participating, then you're not contributing to that. And also that's how you can make change and make sure that your community represents your own values. And it's so important. So my parents always brought me to go and vote, but they wouldn't tell me who they voted for. They wouldn't tell me what their political opinions. Even I asked, my mom told me I voted, and I was like, who did you vote for? And she goes, it's my right not to tell you. She told me that 2 days ago when she voted. But so then I kind of had to learn. First, I was just interested in politics, so I actually entered in through a Republican candidate when my best friend's dad was running for a local seat, and so I was just interested in the process. And then eventually, that was when I was like 8 years old, and then over time, I kind of developed my own values, and I've always been kind of more hesitant to. I don't like imposing my own opinions on other people, but I do really feel passionate for political efficacy, people understanding that their opinions are important. Like that's what should be driving our government, what should be driving politics. So the more people get involved, but whether it's by voting, for sure essential, but even getting more involved is how how our country should be run. So how helping people get involved in that process is what I'm really passionate about. So that's what I've been really grateful I've been able to work with Democrats abroad, working on Get Out the Vote. I help at least one person every day get their vote in or get registered or whatever they need. So it's really what one of my greatest passions, and it's great to help people vote from abroad.
And actually, Sam, you helped me get my vote. You and my coworker Lydia really helped to make it way easier, because really voting abroad from New York State is very complicated, and I was surprised to learn how complicated it is. And I know that each state has its own kind of rules around that. But before we dive into the pre-submitted questions, I wanted to ask you, the differences that you've seen with your experience here in Argentina versus the US, and maybe one kind of what have you seen from people and how they feel about it. And for context, I'll let everyone on the line know that in Argentina, voting is obligatory. So you have to go and vote or you get charged a fee. And want to give that context first. So, how people feel about it, how people view it, and then, what differences you've kind of seen and how you feel about those differences.
Yeah, so I mean, like Nicole said, it's obligatory here. So that just from the beginning, there's a lot of just systematic issues that then create like some differences in attitudes that just come from those systematic differences. So one being that it's obligatory here where you have to register in the United States. The other, I think the biggest difference, and one of the things that makes this, this effort so or not difficult, but it's one of the more difficult things, is that it's a federal system in the United States. So every state has its own voting rules. So everyone has the right to vote in federal elections and in these elections, but it's up to each state to really decide, the rules of how to do things. So when people ask questions, like you said, there's states like New York that are incredibly difficult. It's having to explain why those. So when people here ask me like, well, why is it so much work for this? Well, because you have to explain and help people investigate, and then it's local elections, and the rules of each office could even be different because depending on what the mailbox is like, and it can be a very, it's just a very, it's a very federal system, so it's a lot more complicated. You have to be able to gain a lot more information and collect information. The other biggest thing is always my favorite thing to try to explain to people that aren't from the United States is the Electoral College, which is a completely different system. And most people, if they're at least a little bit tuned into US news and politics, they understand that, wow, I know that it's really weird because they know that, Hillary won the popular vote, but Trump won the Electoral College, and it's something that happens to some degree of frequency. So they're like, well, how does that work? And then I try to explain to people how it works, and you can explain it, and they're like, well, why? That doesn't make any sense. And I was like, well, I know, but it's in the Constitution, so that's just how we do things, and it's based on traditions, and it doesn't necessarily make too much sense. So that becomes another. So the way attitudes are, that's one thing in the United States, is people are taught, in their civics classes or whatever in school, that, well, look at this Electoral College, and they explain how complicated it is, and then people go, well, then my vote doesn't count, or it's not important, or people don't teach them how to vote. Like, not everyone has parents like me, or Nicole said that her parents were the same, that they brought her and showed her how to vote. They showed me how to vote, and they showed me that it's important. Not everyone has that. A lot of times it's certain demographics, there's just generations of people, or perhaps somebody, it's the first generation people who even can vote, and they don't even they're just learning about it, and they learn how complicated it can be. In some states, they make it even more difficult to vote, even if you're not voting from abroad. So it can be really difficult, where in Argentina, where it's all more it's more similar across the board. It's like, you do this, you go to this place. I went with my friend to vote during the presidential election this past year, in both the primary and the main elections. I was like, sitting there, because I started, comparative politics, and I think it's so interesting how different systems work. So that's so different, even, the debate system. Debates here aren't even debates. It's kind of ridiculous. Where, like, even the United States, the politics are just all blown up, and it's such a performance. It's very theatrical. So even the process of how we run our campaigns are very different.
Oh, yeah. It's really, really interesting to be able to compare here versus there, here being Argentina, there being the United States, right? And then even when you look more abroad, looking at the way that people put maybe caps on campaign spending and all different things across different countries. But I was hoping that you could actually kind of talk about the Electoral College, because I know we have a global community. And so I'm sure there are people on the line who actually aren't familiar with the Electoral College, or they've heard about it. And like you're saying, know that in the last election, Hillary won the popular vote and Donald Trump won the Electoral College. So why does that matter? What does that mean?
The Electoral College, to give like a basic overview, is it's how the president is elected. So technically speaking, the president isn't elected by people. It's elected by electors who are chosen by the state, who are then chosen directly by the people. So it's kind of a system. It's a pyramid type system there, which creates the electors. And the electors there's 538 electoral votes, which are the Congress. So it's all the Congress, so House of Representatives plus the Senate, so the number of votes plus 3 for Washington D.C. electors and electoral votes. And so then those votes are then allotted to each state, gets a certain amount depending on, the amount of which, House of Representatives is decided by the amount of the population size, and then also the Senate. So each state has at least 3 electoral votes. So even a state like Wyoming, who has very low population, has at least 3 electoral votes. And then there's states like California and Texas that obviously have a lot more due to their population. So it's the Electoral College. It's controversial on all sides. People in small states say that big states have too much power, and then people in other big states say that small states have too much power, because it's like, well, look how many people are in California, and there's only, what is it? I don't want to say that my estimated population of Wyoming, but it's a very small amount of people that have the same amount of votes as, because it's such a small group of people. So that's one of the things that that's how you get that warped system. And then there's 2 states, Nebraska and Maine, who split the votes. But in the rest of the states, so in 48 of the states, United States, it's a winner take all system. So within the state, whoever gets the most votes, whichever the candidates, gets all of the electoral votes. And then whichever candidate then gets to, it would be cool if we had like a map, but but you can like look up in the Electoral College map. And so then whatever state, as those states, Minnesota, I think has 10. I'm originally from Minnesota. Minnesota has, 10 and it's going to the Democrats. And then Texas has so many and this one goes there. Whatever candidate first gets to 270, the first one that gets to 270 electoral votes wins the campaign. So then you could possibly win the majority of votes if you're winning tons of votes in let's say a Democratic candidate is winning a ton of votes in California, but they only have the cap of, I think it's 55 electoral votes that California has. And then but then, the amount of votes that they're actually getting is disproportionate to how many electoral votes the candidate is getting. And that's what kind of makes it so complicated and so difficult to understand. So a lot of states, which then I think one of the questions that we have is about swing states, which is then, because most states are safe states where generally because it's a winner take all system, all the electoral votes from that state goes to one candidate or another. It doesn't get split, where Nebraska and Maine, they can split it. So they have a little bit of a different system. So there's a lot of people on both sides propose changing or eliminating the Electoral College for a variety of different reasons.
Well, thank you for that. Lydia wrote that it's very confusing to explain.
It's difficult to explain, but
yes, it's very complicated, but it's very interesting to see how this plays into U.S. elections and how important all of this is, and also how that plays into this narrative that your votes don't matter, right? And so thank you for that oversight there and explaining that. We have all these pre-submitted questions, which I'm really excited to dive into today. And so just want to reiterate, if anyone has any questions or any comments, please feel free to drop them in the chat or come off of mute, however you prefer best. So diving into this first question, and perfect segue from the Electoral College. So does my vote actually matter? And what is the point of voting if we have an Electoral College?
So the answer is absolutely yes. Your vote always matters for a variety of reasons. For one thing, like I said previously, I mean, we have a democracy and it all also this whole system is based off people having to vote. I was looking up the statistics and in uh the last several elections, it's the national voter turnout of eligible voters is around 60%. So that's 40% of the people of the eligible voters in the United States whose voice isn't being heard in there. So that's a huge amount of people that could definitely change that. And even within the electoral college system, that could change a lot. And also local elections are incredibly important. So yeah, you shouldn't just be focusing on, oh, I should vote every 4 years. No, there's always local elections, voting and people into the Senate, voting people into Congress. We see that with, it's incredibly important for situations like with the Supreme Court, which is a huge topic right now. And it's important to get involved with all levels of government, because that's really where you start seeing a change. You can see your values being represented on every level. And then generally, even as I just explained how complicated the Electoral College is, it's still based on people's votes and people going out and making their voice heard. Also, one of the other things is primaries. I mean, it's already passed at this point, but like primary elections are incredibly important, primaries and caucuses. So getting out there and making sure you find, oh, what candidate best represents my own values and where can I best put my vote towards, because your vote is important. That's and the other thing is, especially this year with all of the complications with mail-in voting, absentee voting, even within the United States, there's so much issues and people trying to fight to make it more difficult for people to vote. You know what? People wouldn't be trying to suppress vote if it wasn't important. So if you're, there's a reason why there's all of these issues where like, oh, well, this is not going to be an issue and there's so much discussion about it. It's because it's important. And people trying to tell you that it isn't, that's not true.
So true. So true. There's a reason why they want to suppress votes if it if it can have an effect, right? If it wasn't so important. That's interesting. I see a lot of influential people talking about that and trying to get people to vote. And I've seen that on some sports teams now. I can't remember which sporting team it was. I think maybe the Philadelphia Eagles. They got their whole team registered to vote, and what kind of message that sends to other people, right? Like, your vote is important, and it is important that you get out there and make your voice heard. Because then you come to the point where you're complaining one way or the other, right? The politics are either going in your favor or against your favor. And it's so important to get out there and voice them, especially in these local elections, which end up influencing these bigger elections, right?
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Yes. All right. So moving into the next question, do you think this election is really more important than previous elections?
So I think that, of course, all elections are important, like I just said, even with local elections. But I think this election has certain qualities that make it particularly important. And a lot of experts in many different fields tend to agree for many different reasons. One thing, or the main thing I would say is, at least looking at, where we are right now in, but in the world, this is an unprecedented year with a lot of issues, especially within the United States. So globally, the pandemic has created a lot of issues of points of concern, whether it's economic, health-wise, people in the United States looking at, well, what am I supposed to do with healthcare if something happens to me, something happens to my family, people losing their jobs, losing their access to healthcare, people saying, being really conscious with climate change and wanting to the United States to participate on a global level. And then they look back at these 4 years, because this is what it is. It's a re-election. It's a re-election race. So you're choosing between an incumbent, Donald Trump, and Joe Biden, or as the possible candidates. So it's a confirmation. So it's, as a country, we have to decide, well, is this something that we're going to continue with? Which is always something important. Then you have to look back at the 4 years and see what that represents. And I think a lot of experts agree it's something that is, if Donald Trump were to win re-election, it would mark the United States saying, this is the path that we want to take. which means pulling back from the global community, not working on a global scale, we're not working with our neighbors, our global neighbors on dealing with the pandemic, not working and compromising and working on a global scale with climate change, with economics, and kind of pulling back from so it's something is with people living in other countries, it's something that we feel really, or at least I feel personally, but I think a lot of Americans living abroad feel as, wow, so I'm representing this government, which is also represented by Trump. Is that something I want to continue doing as we move forward? Is that the country that I want to be representing? So that's just, one thing is also just seeing the level of divisions this year with, the incredible movements with the Black Lives Matter movements, with just the violence and things like that, and just even more divided country on so many different fronts that has only divided more over these past 4 years. Is that something that people really want to continue? So I know I've read a lot of really interesting articles of historians talking about, other important elections like 1860, which then led to the Civil War with Abraham Lincoln, is what people would say was the most important thing. But then you have to think about how important this is, looking at where the United States is on a global level of it in a position of leadership, and expecting something from that, and especially in the situation where everyone in the world is in this same boat, as might look to a country like the United States like, well, do it now, and then what do we want that to look like moving forward now that we've already had several months of this and it's going to continue to be an issue? I think is one thing that just makes this, it's already going to be an important election coming into 2020, and this year has only pushed us further to that understanding.
Thank you for that. And I want to ask, your opinion on this. So do you think that people feel more pushed to vote this year? What you've seen, I've been watching social media and what people have been saying. And I mean, looking at polls and stuff, I think it's only so representative, right? Because going into the 2016 election, the polls were looking really favorably for Hillary Clinton. And although she won the popular vote, unfortunately, she didn't win the Electoral College vote, which ended in Donald Trump becoming president. And so, do you feel, comparing these two elections, that people feel more pushed to vote this year? Or do you feel like people resonate more, maybe not so with the candidates, but with that idea of voting and getting out there to voice their opinions? Or do you feel people are still kind of hesitant?
I feel like people are this year pushed more to get out there and vote. For one thing, is what I was saying, it is a confirmation election. It's before in 2016, it was, here are these two candidates, or we can speculate on how they would govern, but you don't necessarily know that for sure on a presidential level. I mean, Hillary Clinton has experience, tons of experience. Trump is, this kind of wild card, but yeah, really quite a wild card. I said kind of a wild card, quite a wild card. Moving forward, but here we are, people know, and people have seen and lived through these 4 years, and say, people are saying, no, you know what, I gave the chance. There's people that may have voted for Trump in 2016 that might say, you know what, I don't like what this has done to my family, I don't like what this has done to my country, and I need to change. Change is one of those really big words, one of those important things that people look for, that pushes people to elections. We saw this with Obama in 2008. We saw this when people want to look for a change, it's something that pushes them to get involved and look for how that can be possible, which would be through this election. So I think that's, one thing that's huge difference. That's the thing, is people are like, I don't really care. And people, because they were just so jaded. I think people this time, even because whatever time I've heard people, the polls are showing Biden ahead, but you never know. Because people have seen this in the past where it's like, that's what we said last time. And then look where we're headed now. So, that's what you see. You see that with, that moment of change, people changing their minds, is something that you see with, especially with Trump struggling with a lot of people, middle-class women or white women that are like, I have kids, or people that have kids, and I don't really know, especially in this uncertain year where people just don't know where we're going moving forward. They really want that leadership, that they're not in this guidance on a national level that, that we're just lacking.
Thank you for that. Yeah, and it can be really confusing when you see the polls and maybe they're going a certain way. But I feel like a lot of times polls are misleading just because of the population they pull from, or the amount of people
Exactly.
that they're sampling. Like there's so many factors in there, and not only in presidential elections, right? Polls in general, to be really representative of an entire nation is you got to pull a lot of people. But it'll be definitely interesting. And so, talking about how important this election is. So, for anyone who's listening, whether they're, a Republican or a Democrat, and if the election doesn't go the way that they want it to go, what do you say is the best next move, right? What can we do beyond that if we're not happy with the election? I mean, it is what it is, essentially, right? But what can we do maybe at a local level when you talk about getting involved with local governments? What can we do?
Yeah, so like you said, so getting involved with local government. With the election of Trump, after that in 2018, you saw a ton of people, new candidates, new representatives coming into the scene and saying, you know what, I need to get in there. A lot of women, a lot of people of color, a lot of women of color coming in and joining, you know what, I need my voice heard. I need to represent, I need to represent these people because they deserve to be represented. So I mean, that's, everyone has to run for run for office. That's by no means what people need to do. But, even just being cautious of things, understanding and being respectful of one another, but then also, looking, okay, so these are the values I want to represent. I'm not happy with how that turned out. Now, what can I do? Whether it's getting involved with local organizations, whether it's getting involved with local campaigns, whether it's going and campaigning for even just issues, so issues in your area, things on a really local level. I know I was looking up issues with local school boards and things like that are hugely important. All of those things are incredibly important. And also the other thing that's super important about this election is, for one thing is Trump has said, well, I don't know if I'm going to accept the result of this election. That really puts into question, traditions and norms of our democracy as a whole. So, think about like, well, if you have to accept things, move things forward and look into that. So these campaigns to change electoral systems, of course, that's huge. But there are groups, there's organizations, there's a lot of people that are working towards these different issues that you can definitely get involved with. There's always a place to get into it, and get involved and look for that change that if things don't turn out how you like, or even if like there's a lot of people that were, for example, fans of Bernie Sanders, but now that he's no longer in the race, maybe not like half-heartedly voting for Biden, and they're like, well, then the day after we're going to get out there and make sure that we're going to hold them accountable, things that they said they would compromise and help bring people from across the political spectrum, because we have a two-party system. I think this is like the next question, but it's the two-party system, but then we have a whole spectrum of people's opinions. So making sure that with your that your representative, people that are supposed to represent you, represent what's important to you and of the community, and holding them accountable for what they say that they're going to do. That's what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to represent you and your community.
For sure, 100%. And diving into that, so yeah, do I have to vote Democrat or Republican, or can I vote for another party candidate? And so, speaking about my experience abroad and talking about this two-party system, when I received my ballot, I believe there were 5 or 6 different parties on there, right? So of course, in the US, you've got Democrats, Republicans, Independent, but I was surprised to see a couple other parties on there. I think the Workers' Party was one. Maybe the Green Party. I can't exactly remember.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so yeah, can you talk about that a little bit? So while we come to this common denominator of this two-party system, what does that mean that we have all these other parties, and what's the importance of that?
So for one thing, to answer the question directly, of course you can vote for another party. You have to figure out if that's the right decision for you. I'm all for people, finding the candidates. So I like to see myself as somebody who respects everyone's opinions, that they find and they investigate and they analyze their own values, and they find a candidate that best represents their own values, and then gives their vote to that person or that cause or whatever you're voting for. So I think that's really important that people understand that. But you also have to understand that we're working within a two-party system, like you just said. So the person who's going to win president is going to be a Democrat or a Republican. So if you are giving your vote to a third-party candidate, whoever that might be, it's not going towards one of those two main candidates, which is a decision for each person to make. They can make that decision on their own. But that was hugely important in 2016, at least how I saw things, is you saw the candidates from, there was a Libertarian candidate and a Green Party candidate. Their names, I don't want to guess them off the top of my head right now. Gary, no, I'm not going to try and guess it. But they were hugely important, and they especially made a huge difference in swing states in certain states, because a lot of people just weren't fans of either of the candidates, so they chose to vote for a third-party candidate because they felt like it represented their opinions, and they didn't want to give their vote to either of the two primary candidates. And that was made a huge difference in the election. So that it hugely swayed certain states from, it would have made. Maybe they would have won, maybe Hillary would have won this one state, but there was a lot of people who chose instead to vote for a third-party candidate, and so then Trump ended up winning, and it does make a huge difference. But also, so people have the right to vote for a third-party candidate by any means. But I also urge people to think about what I just said as well about voting for maybe one of the two top candidates. A Democrat or Republican that's closest to their opinions, and then afterwards making those moves to work to encourage them to represent the values that are most important to you, because there's a whole political spectrum on either side there. So and the other thing is in local elections you see a lot more possibility for third-party candidates to win. It's of course not common, it's still mostly Democrat or Republican, but you see more representation on that level, and it's because it's more representative of a specific community, which sometimes within certain demographics, within certain areas, you see a higher presence of a more specific part of the political scale there.
Totally. Well, thank you for laying all that information out. It's super important to know about all this information. And, as much as I think we wish it was common knowledge, all of this isn't common knowledge. So it's really important to talk about this and highlight this, because sometimes I think we go into voting blindly, and especially if we haven't had parents, like you said, or people in our lives who have influenced us about the importance of voting and what it means. We may go into it blindly and not understand the repercussions that it has when you vote for a third party, or if you don't get involved after. And so we talked about this a little bit before, but why are swing states so important? And what does it mean? Is it a state that flip-flops between Democrat and Republican, or what does that mean exactly?
So swing states, so like I mentioned before, there are safe states, which most states are. I think people have their own kind of definitions of what a swing state is. There's at least one definition that, that like probably 40 out of 50 of the states are pretty solidly in the past like 5 elections. I think like 35 states consistently voted for the president in the same, from the Democratic candidate or the Republican candidate, and they haven't swayed during the past 5 elections. And there's others that are, since 2000, I think it's 40 out of 50 of them have consistently either voted for the Republican or the Democratic candidate. Swing states are one of two things. One thing is that they, like you said, teeter-totter back and forth, that, maybe in one election they go one direction, the next election they go for the other direction. I think North Carolina in 2008 voted for Obama, but then in 2012 they elected, their vote went towards Mitt Romney. So they kind of go back and forth. So they have that smaller margin. So due to demographics or all kinds of different issues, it has that, there's just, there's more, they kind of go back and forth, and there's people that change their opinions over time and choose to vote for each different candidate. I think, this year they said some of the most important ones are, it's like Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Florida are always, really important. Georgia, North Carolina, and actually my home state of Minnesota is on it, which has been consistently Democrat, my whole life. And then But this past year, they voted for the votes went towards Hillary Clinton, but by a very small margin compared to in the past. I think a lot of it had to do with third-party candidates, actually, because in Minnesota they tend to be Democrats, but moderate Democrats, and anyway, for all kinds of different reasons. So in these states, because like I explained that in the Electoral College system, because most states either vote towards one or the other, they already kind of understand. So this California is going blue, Texas is going red. These are just things that they know based on demographics, based on history. But then these states are the ones that can change, and so that's where candidates really focus their money. I think I heard that 75% of campaign funds go towards campaigning in 9 states. That's where they put their money towards, because that's the people that end up deciding the election. And in the end, within the kind of system that we have. By no means does that mean if you don't live in a swing state, your vote isn't important, because if people stopped voting, that would completely change the percentages. But yeah, that's what makes swing states so important, and that's kind of what they are. They also call them battleground states. They're states where, because you see the candidates I'm sure if you live in those states, you get the ads from both candidates all the time, and people trying to say that they represent your values, and so that's why you see them being so important.
It's so interesting because New York State goes blue, right? Blue's Democrat. And so it's funny because really New York State is not actually very Democrat. You go beyond New York City, I think even into Staten Island, it's pretty Republican. But most of all of state New York is Republican, but because the population in New York City is so big, it really changes the whole state. And that's so interesting, because talking about the importance of elections and voting, if 30% of New York City decided not to vote, I mean, New York State would probably switch to a red state very quickly because of how Republican the state is beyond New York City, at least from what I've heard from people talking. So it's just very interesting to look at all that.
Yeah, and that's why people also look at, states like Maine and Nebraska, where I kind of explained how they split their electoral votes. So certain districts, if the majority in that district goes towards a different candidate, then they can split their votes. People have talked about how that being a solution, something that would help, that would change states like New York, where, maybe New York City, which has this many, votes in districts, those get a certain amount of votes, but then other people in other part of the state also feel it in the state. Also, maybe there would be some votes that go towards the Republican candidate, or same thing in Texas, maybe in certain cities, the vast majority of people would vote Democrat rather than Republican. Because in a lot of states, because rural areas are mostly Republican. So I vote in Washington State. So I lived and I'm registered in Tacoma, so near Seattle, where it tends to be quite Democrat. But in the rest of the state, the whole east side of Washington tends to be quite Republican. So
it is so interesting.
Yeah,
it is so interesting.
So I wish I could have. I was going to change my registration to Minnesota, but I didn't get to do that this year.
Oh man. Well, thank you for all that information. And so now talking about voting. So how do I register to vote and request a ballot?
Yes, this is where I want to talk to people that are both living in the United States and outside the United States that want to register and want to vote. Like we talked about briefly before, the thing that makes the United States so special and complicated is that every state is very different. So deadlines and processes are very different. So I will just, first of all, I know more about, and I've gotten more involved with voting from abroad, but within the United States, vote.org, I think, is a great site to go through that has all the information you need with deadlines and how to register, when you need to register. Some states have same-day registration or how you need to do it if you're voting within the country. And then from abroad, the great site that I've been volunteering with this year has been votefromabroad.org, which is there's another one, that people use, but Vote From Abroad just makes it so easy and has all the information super easy to find. So to register to vote, so it gives you all the information. It's like, all you need to do is register to vote from abroad. You need to fill out I wrote down here. There's so many acronyms when it comes to voting, I swear. Here it is. Oh, you need to fill out a federal postcard application. The reasons why I call it is also historic, but it's FPCA. Every year, if you're voting from abroad, you should submit one. You have to submit one for every calendar year in which you hope to vote. And so that, it gets you, that's how you request your ballot. And so if you fill out this form, because states have other systems, you can do it directly there. But if you register federally, then you have the right to vote in all federal elections, even if you're an American living abroad. So what this system does is it does a few different things, which it makes them send you your ballot. They're obliged to send you the ballot, and if not, you can send up a backup federal ballot. And it helps you, and that's really like the main form you want to fill out, which all these sites are the first thing they direct you to. So votefromabroad.org is the important thing for voting from abroad. And then on there, they'll give you the information you need they'll give you all the information, email address for your local election office, which is who you need to contact with for a lot of issues specific to your area. So that's basically how you can register to vote and request your ballot from abroad. And then whether you have to do that by email, mail, fax, or whatever, it'll give you the instructions directly on there when you put in your voting registration address and everything like that. So they make it super easy.
Perfect. And what about early voting, right? So we're seeing a lot in the US now that we're, I think like 20 days away from the election or less. So I've seen a lot of places opening up for early voting. So for the people in the US, what does that mean? And how can you vote early?
Yeah, so that's again, because it's so different, there's not a general rule within the United States. Different states have different rules. So that's one of the things that can be really helpful if you go, I'm sure it says on that vote.org website, if you go, because it has a whole list of all the different states, that'll give you information of if you can request an absentee vote, if you can vote ahead of time in person. Some states make it super easy, others make it more difficult for a whole variety of reasons. But it is an option under certain circumstances in every state to vote ahead of time. It's just a matter of if you need an excuse, some states aren't even allowing COVID as an excuse or concerns like that. But it's totally something worth looking into, specifically with your local election office, because unfortunately there isn't oh yeah, of course you can all go to this address. I wish it were that easy.
Oh, if only it were so easy. If only it were so easy. They make it a very dramatic event for a very non-dramatic event when it actually happens. I know we were talking about this before we hopped on, but when I recently voted when I was down here. My coworker Lydia, she came with me, which was super helpful. And when I dropped off my ballot, they were like, okay, thanks. And I was like, oh, that's it. And the most exciting part of it was really just taking my picture and holding my ballot, not the fact that I didn't even get an I voted sticker, which I was really excited to get. And so, my other interesting experience was when we had when I was in college, we had a classmate who was from Venezuela. And so he came with me to the primary election, the local election. He came with me to some election and I voted, and it was that was really exciting because he was super excited about what it meant to vote and get to see the whole process from a foreigner's view. But yeah, very anticlimactic to go vote.
Yeah, I was saying so I'm originally from Minnesota, but so my first presidential election was the Trump-Clinton election, because I turned 18 right in 2012, but in 2013, so right after the election. So that was unfortunate. But so the only time I've ever gotten to vote in person in Minnesota was in a really small local election. But I was like, I'm gonna do it in person. And then after that, I moved to Washington State, where it's all by mail, which is fun, but it's not the same. You just drop it off in at the library outside. They have a box and you drop it off there, and it's quite anticlimactic. Oh. And then here I vote by email, so
yeah,
yay! But it's not even a fun web page. It's all black and white.
You do a little
boring.
party afterwards, some, flashing lights or some confetti coming out of
Yeah.
a virtual box. Oh
Yeah.
gosh, yeah. Perfect. So diving into the next question. So what if I haven't registered to vote yet? What should I do?
So first thing is I would say go to the two websites that I talked about before. So if you're within the United States, votefromabroad.org, and if you're voting from abroad, votefromabroad.org, because it's also really important to understand that so some deadlines may have already passed. In a lot of states they have, but it's different if you're abroad from if you're in the United States. So it's important just make sure that you're getting your information on one place or the other, because people are like, well, my friend in Texas told me this. I'm like, but look, it's different. And it might even be before or after. And there's not necessarily a lot of rhyme or reason when the deadlines are compared to within the United States. So first, make sure that you can get registered. And then on these websites, it'll give you the instructions on what you need to do. So sometimes it can be super simple. Other times it might be a little bit more difficult. And then take it from there, because again, it's a state by state system. Some states require you, if you're especially registering for the first time, to send it in by mail, which then can, put, when you're getting so close to the election, make things more complicated. But you got to try. It's never too late to try and see what you can do. And because a lot of states also, like, you can even send in your ballot, and as long as you send it before the election day, if it arrives after, it can still be counted. But it totally depends on the state.
Oof, so much goes into voting. And so I just want to shout out, if anyone has a question on the line, please feel free, to come off of mute or write your question in the chat, as we have just about, a little over 10 minutes left. And so Sam, moving on to the next question, how can I verify that I am indeed registered to vote and will receive an absentee ballot? I believe I'm all set, but I want to be sure. What do I do?
So what I did, just before this, I checked to make sure my ballot was accepted, and it was, which is great because my primary ballot I had to send back. But so most election offices, you want to get in contact with your local election offices. For most of these, you can do it online. You just put in your information. For me, I put in my information, and it showed me, when I was asking for my ballot, like, oh, you're registered to vote, good to go. Then I checked again, and it said, okay, we've sent you your ballot. I didn't get it, so I sent them an email, and they're like, we'll send it to you again. I don't think they sent it the first time. They were just covering themselves. And then they sent it to me, and then I voted, and now I saw that it was accepted. If it's not a system like that, you have to contact your local election offices. So you could do that every step of the way, being like, hey, I sent my registration, did you get it? And they should, respond to you and confirm, because that's their job, making sure that you have it there. So it's either through this online system, and if it doesn't, if it's not looking well, if you just prefer to contact them, you can call them. There's a lot that you can do, because I've even heard, the people that work at these election offices, is that they want to do, and they were here to help you vote. So, that's what you got to do.
Yes, got to get out and vote. Okay, perfect. So great. So even if you're abroad, you can check if your ballot has been received and accepted.
Yeah, and make sure, it's really important that you make it clear that you're voting from overseas, that you're voting from abroad, because especially this year, there's so much absentee voting or, mail-in voting, that, just to make sure things are simple. Like, I even think they may have sent my ballot initially to the address I'm registered at. But, I was like, hey, just make sure, I'm voting from abroad, and I wanted to receive it by email. That's the other important thing. When you're registering, when you're requesting your ballot, make sure you request it to be sent to you by email, because otherwise you're going to be waiting to get it, to receive it by snail mail, and then sending it back by snail mail, because all states allow you to get your ballot sent to you by email. And then it's a process of printing it out. And I think I sent you the New York ballot origami, where you have to fold everything a certain way. But
gosh, yeah.
But it's a lot better than having to wait for something, and at least us in Argentina, having to rely on the Argentine postal service. I would not hope to have to do that again, but that's another important thing to do. If you can do things digitally.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you for that, Sam. All right. And so when will I receive my ballot?
So let's just say, it's the beginning of the year, and this is, would have been a few months ago. If you send in this federal postcard application, the FPCA, that obliges your local election office to send you your ballot 45 days before the election. So this year it would have been September 19th. Now that we're past there, I mean, you should be getting it as soon as possible, but I'm sure, it depends on your office. At this point, they're not they don't have that deadline as if you would have done it beforehand. Where you have to send it, but they should be sending it to you as soon as possible. The other thing that I mentioned briefly before is if you don't receive your ballot, or if you're afraid you're not going to receive it, you can send a FWAB FWAB, which is a federal write-in absentee ballot, which is like a backup ballot. So if you feel like maybe your ballot's they're not gonna send you the ballot, or it's not gonna get there in time, you can already, go online, look up FWAB, and it has the instructions on how to send it in. And it's a federal ballot because all US citizens living abroad have the right to vote in federal elections. So voting for, for president and vice president. And it's just it's a write-in. You write in the candidates that you're voting for, and you send it in that way. So in case your ballot doesn't get to you, or doesn't get to your local election offices, or there's some kind of issue there, that serves as a backup. And if it does get there, they just throw away the federal one. It serves directly as a backup.
Awesome. Thank you for that information. All right. And so when and how should I return my ballot? And and I think you talked about this, but can I and do I have to return my ballot by mail?
Yeah. So as we talked about, so if you're within the United States, I talked about how you have to check with your local election offices. If you're voting from abroad, it depends. Just over half of the states of the 50 states allow you to return your ballot by email, online, or fax, which fax you can basically do through an app or a different kind of services. You don't have to have access to a fax machine necessarily. So most states, I think it was 30 out of 50, because some of them have asterisk, you can vote that way. And if you're in the other states, you have to send your ballot by postal mail. So it depends. So we always say vote the fastest way you can. So if you can vote by email or I did it through an online form, do it that way. If they allow you to do it by fax, like California is the big one that does it by fax. You can send it by fax. And then if you can, and then, through postal mail if you need to, which is, I guess, the slowest way, but if that's the way you have to do it, that's the way you have to do it.
New York does not allow you to fax or email in your vote.
No, New York is one of the kind of the stupid difficult ones. It's doesn't super make a lot of sense, because some states, even this year, specifically due to COVID, they changed. I think Iowa and another state, New Hampshire maybe it was, they used to require mail-in voting, but now they've allowed you to do it by email, which honestly, I know Lydia is a California voter. Fax ended up doing the same thing as an email, so doesn't really make that much sense why people that already use the fax system wouldn't allow email. But
I went old school. I just wanted to do it the old
retro.
But also I did it on purpose because I actually wanted to track every step of the way. And so I did the fax. I downloaded this fax app and faxed it in. And then I confirmed right away with my California office that they received it. So it was just great to see that. I mean, I could track it, everything, and it was confirmed, and I feel, pretty good about it being in already.
Yeah, no, it's super great. When I saw that received and accepted, I was like, awesome. Because one of the biggest thing is signatures, especially with the online thing. I had to duplicate my signature with my cursor on you couldn't even take a picture, because one of the nice things is with votefromabroad.org, for the signature thing, you can just sign a piece of paper and take a picture of it and it'll put it on there for you. But I had to try to duplicate my signature with a mouse, and I probably spent 30 minutes on that, because the last time I got my ballot in the past has been rejected because of it. Because it wasn't, because they match it up. That's how they verify it's you. They match up which of course, if I was signing, it would be my signature, but it's very difficult to replicate. This year, it's all good. So.
Oof. Oh my gosh. That's crazy. Oh, so much fun to vote, but very important. So we have to do it. And important things aren't always that fun, unfortunately. So, we've got time for this last question. So I understand that postal mail will take an extra long time this year. So can I use a commercial carrier service such as UPS or FedEx?
Yes, probably yes. So if you're voting from abroad, especially, this is the option to go with right now. So you got yours in with where you some countries, luckily you have access, and some certain areas you have access to the diplomatic pouch through your local embassy. But at this point, because that also just takes so much time, at this point, that's no longer an option at this point in time. So your best option would be a private courier service, especially if you're voting from abroad. There's a few things that are really important to take note here. First of all, you have to make sure that you're sending your ballot to a physical address, because these services won't deliver to a PO box, is one thing to make sure. The other thing to make sure that it's not going to require signature upon arrival, because your election office won't sign for it. The other thing is DHL would be my recommended one, because especially if you're voting from abroad, most countries have negotiated discounts, discount codes for using DHL. I'm not sure about other services, but I know DHL for sure. I mean, I could share the Argentina one is like #hashtag Aura US, but it's different places. So I would look up with, if you're living abroad, like local country committees. Most of them have it on their social media, because it was a huge thing like a month ago that we got discount codes, because some countries have even more discount than we do. I think Canada has 40% to send ballots in through DHL. So I would look at that. And the other thing is, if you're voting, let's say you're voting with, if you're voting with other people, also from the United States, also abroad, that are voting in the same election office, you can send your ballots in the same, DHL or FedEx package. But it has to be going to, of course, to the same place. So those are things just to make sure, but you should be able to do it as long as these things check out.
Amazing. Thank you for all that information. And so we have just about a minute left, and I wanted to see if you had anything else that you wanted to send us out with, any last, messages prior to this election, or about voting.
I would say vote. If you have voted, check to make sure you get that check mark where it's like it's been accepted and arrived. Your ballot, make sure it's counted, and also take care of yourself during this time. I don't know about yourselves, but even beyond this context of this time that we're in, this is going to be a very particular election, so be sure to take care of yourself. Do what you need to do, plug if you need to, plug in if you need to, because it's going to be I think everyone agrees that it's going to be a very particular election, and it might be a particularly stressful election. So, make sure to take care of yourself during this process as well, and take care of your vote.
Yes, definitely. Thank you for those last final words. And Lydia said days off after November 3rd.
Yeah.
Yes, Lydia, we may need it with all the stress that this year has caused, this unprecedented year. Well, I want to thank you so much, Sam, for coming to talk about voting, everything that, is about the Electoral College, and explaining that, because I think when we talk about voting, this is something that we do have to talk about and is so important. So I want to thank you for being here today and your time. And I want to thank everyone on the line. And I hope that you all have a very non-2020 day, and get out there and vote.
Yes. Thank you, everyone, for joining in.
Thank you.
And for having me, of course.